one of the first partners. I had the pleasure of being a beta tester on the very first version of the API version, the pre-released API, which was pretty cool. And then I became a customer, and we were wall to wall. We had everybody in the company had seats of Salesforce, and did that for about 3 years. And I got an opportunity. I was actually very lucky. I was brave enough to try to pitch Mark Benioff on an idea that I had, to see if he wanted to fund me as a startup. And of course he said, this is not my area of expertise. So no, I'll introduce you to a venture capitalist that I work with. And if he likes it, he'll fund it. And if he doesn't like it, come back and work for us. And I ended up not, getting beat on that idea. There were several other companies doing it, and I came back and said, okay, what can I do for Salesforce? And I was in the right place at the right time. I guess that's about all I can say is that AppExchange was an idea. They were calling it the Multi-Force Directory at the time. The original name for AppExchange was Multi-Force Directory. And but then Mark owned AppExchange and AppStore.com. He owned those URLs, and he just decided he had a vision for being able to, for enterprise SaaS software, being able to go onto a store and download applications into your SaaS platform, which was, that was just revolutionary. In fact, the reason that him owning AppStore.com as the URL is important is because you might recognize that as the App Store from Apple. And when we launched, I came on board. I was the product manager. We had to pull together the original packaging technology, and I also want to apologize to everyone for Change Sets. Change Sets was built in one of my teams over the first couple of years. But we built AppExchange. I started in May, and by September 11th of that year, 2005, we had a working prototype of AppExchange, and 53 apps at that Dreamforce. We had 53 apps that we could demonstrate installed into an org and working. And then we finished it all up and got more partners there, and we had 100 apps, I think, by January of 2006, which is when we went live. And I continued to own all the partner ISV part of the AppExchange for a while, although the website itself and the partner team it's just turned into a huge part of the Salesforce machine. The partner piece of AppExchange. But that was the most exciting thing that I did in that first period. And then we went directly. We had this debate between AppExchange or App Store, and Mark went out and did a customer advisory board. He brought in a bunch of customers and did a focus group, and said, what should we call it? Should it be AppExchange or should it be App Store? And at the time, we weren't selling anything. It was all downloaded. You didn't actually conduct any business there. And there were open source items, and there were items from partners. And so the customers basically said, it's an exchange, it's not a store. And so we named it AppExchange. Mark made the decision. And then we had this App Store moniker, and we were thinking, okay, could we actually do business? And for the next year, we actually tried to figure out what it would take to sell on AppExchange. And when we figured out that, we had customers doing, a credit card purchase might make sense for maybe $1,000 or more, but not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we realized that it's not going to be something that you're going to buy $100,000 worth of app on a store. So Mark gave Steve Jobs the App Store name. And that's when they created the Apple App Store.
That's a fascinating story. Gave Steve Jobs that. Okay.
Yeah.
So
He could have sold it for a lot of money if he was selling it to another company. But Mark was very, you know, he admired Steve Jobs quite a bit, and so he gave Steve the AppStore.com URL.
Cool. Well, that's a great story, David, and thank you for agreeing to present here. And it looks like we're ready to go. And so this is David Brooks, who's the VP of Products at Capato and has a long and storied history with Salesforce that he'll tell you about. And he's going to talk to us about DevOps today and a little bit about Capato. Thank you so much. There you
Cool.
go.
And can you confirm you're still seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
Awesome. So hi everybody. Like I said in the onboarding here, I've been in the Salesforce community now 17 years. First I was a partner at a company called Dejima, and then I was a customer, and then I worked for Salesforce for 9 years. It was an amazing ride, and then I left to. I decided to get out and do something completely different. In the music business. And let me tell you what, the Salesforce ecosystem is the place to be, because the music business, there's a lot of excitement, but there's no money. And the customers out there are not as enthusiastic as the Salesforce community is. So, you know, I was excited to come back into the Salesforce world as a partner at a company called Job Science. And then 2 years ago, I joined as VP of Products for a company called Capato. Capato, basically, if you're wondering, it's an Argentinian slang word, which means really great, really cool. And it's an interesting story about how the company got that name, but we'll see if we have time for that at the end. But who is Capato? Capato makes a DevOps solution, a native DevOps solution for the Salesforce space. And we've been in business since 2013. Some of the biggest customers in the Salesforce space, but it's all about really, it's not just about the product, it's about the customer trust and really taking that Salesforce DNA, because a lot of the people at Capato actually came from Salesforce and had lots of years. We probably have hundreds of years of experience of Salesforce inside Capato, and it's all about customer success and trust. That's the number one thing for Salesforce, and it's the number one thing for us. And as you can see, we've got customers across all the different verticals and some pretty big names. And we're very excited about that, but we also see this as a great responsibility to make sure that we're there for them and that we're doing a good job. So why DevOps? And the answer really is that DevOps is an area where a lot of companies are investing today, and the reason they're investing in DevOps is productivity improvement. They want to improve their productivity. 58% of the people that have invested in DevOps on the Salesforce platform did so because they wanted to improve the productivity of their team. Again, I've already apologized for change sets, but that's what we had before the real DevOps companies came along and provided better solutions, and that's why the productivity increased requirement. But that's the same for all of the DevOps teams, no matter what platform you're developing on. Really, is we want productivity, we want security, we want innovation. We work together. There's a DevOps, a state of the DevOps report by an organization called DORA that's been out for several years now. And we decided we wanted to do that specifically in the Salesforce community, in the Salesforce development community. And so we worked together with Beagle Research to put together our own state of DevOps survey for the Salesforce space. And we asked the customers that were investing in DevOps, what kind of benefit are they getting? And this is not just our customers, this is across the entire Salesforce ecosystem. What kind of benefit are you getting from your investment in DevOps? And the numbers surprised us. They were incredibly good. 17% of the customers are getting more than $5 million in benefit annually by investing in DevOps. And 18% are getting $2.5 million of benefit. So to combine, 35% or more are making are returning returning more than $2.5 million on their investment. So that's a big deal. And why are they doing that? Well, if you think about the history of software and the systems of record, so you got your finance systems and your systems of record and your supply chain and systems of differentiation. Those things. I mean, nobody does daily updates to SAP for the most part, right? People do major upgrades of SAP, once every 2 to 3 years because it's such a major effort, and because it's so critical to business. So there are certain tools in the enterprise that you don't want to upgrade all the time, but when you start getting into the systems that touch people, like your e-commerce system or your social or your IoT or even your sales and support and marketing, you got to change on a regular basis. And so every 30 to 90 days for systems of innovation, and every day in reality, the requirement is every day for your systems of engagement. And so your release velocity becomes really, really important. But what we found, and this is not unique to Capato, what we find is that you can't really go faster unless your operational excellence improves. So I can't really, if I tried to release daily, but my processes were not really geared to that. They weren't excellent enough. They weren't fine-tuned enough. Then it's just going to be a disaster. You're going to break the system every day. So it really is a matter of improving your operational excellence of your team at the same time to increase your velocity and get to what we call DevOps enlightenment. Is really how can I release multiple times a day and do so with a very high level of confidence that I'm not going to break anything, and that if I do break something, that I've got a low cost, a very, very short time to recover. So what is my mean time to recovery in the case that I have a failure? So it's all about moving very fast, but doing so with confidence and with quality and being able to back out any changes if you make a mistake. But again, you have to have operational excellence to make that happen. And so when we've been dealing with enterprise customers, it's kind of independent of the size of the company, believe it or not. But we find that there's really 5 levels of maturity in the DevOps world. We see, especially in the Salesforce world, we see customers that are using Salesforce as the source of truth, that they're doing ad hoc component releases, but they're just kind of selecting from one org and promoting to another, and no structure, no rhyme, no reason. The next level is where they've really put in version control, so they now use Git as a source of truth. And the next level up we see is what we call agile releases, where you're keeping track of the metadata changes for your org on a user story by user story basis. We believe strongly that the user story should be the container of change, so that I know when I get 100 user stories into user acceptance test, for example, and the business decides that they're going to promote 50 of the 100 to production, but the other 50 aren't ready yet, then I can easily promote those 50, and the other 50 get updated. They go back and we change the scope, or we change or we do more to it, we add more to it before it's ready for the business. But then when you get up to the next level, you're trying to automate everything. So the levels 1 through 3 have been very manual, to be honest with you. A lot of manual work, a lot of pull requests where a coder is looking at a manager is looking at the dev's code and trying to inspect in quality, if you will. But for example, they haven't done static code analysis, or they haven't done functional testing with Selenium or other tools out there like Autonomic. So they're not really automating things. But when you get that next level where you're automating things, you can go faster, and you can go faster, more and safe at the same time. And then really getting to nirvana is all about continuous delivery. And continuous delivery means I can release the change all the way to production. I'm not doing waterfall releases anymore. I'm releasing darkly. I'm building my application in a way that I can release it to production. And so all of this is kind of set up to what is it I'm trying to do? I'm trying to go faster with confidence in order to take care of the business needs that I've got. And I need to put in a set of processes into my organization so that I can go fast and I can go fast with confidence. And so, how do I know that? If I've got a tool like, even a tool like Capado, where I've got a really good insight into my process, uh, how do I measure the actual velocity of things? And so in this at Trailhead in May, we announced DevOps 360. And DevOps 360 is a product line, and it consists of two products at this point. One of them was role-based DevOps analytics, and we're not going to talk about that today. Today, we're going to talk about value stream maps. And value stream maps is a tool that we sell available as an add-on that can be used for not only looking at your metrics in your DevOps tool, but also you can use this for anything. And what we're going to talk about today is really what is value stream maps, and what are the pieces of a value stream map, and how does it help me? How can I use this thing? So let's move on to this. So what is a value stream, first of all? Well, back in the 90s, I believe, a long time ago in the Toyota, they started looking at lean manufacturing, and they started trying to figure out how they could go faster, how they could reduce just-in-time inventory was the big thing back in the 90s, right? So how do I have just enough inventory just in time in order to keep my costs down, in order to get the quality up, and how do I do all of that? And so value stream mapping was designed or discovered around that time. And it really is about taking your business, taking a process within your business, and trying to figure out what are the sub processes associated with that end-to-end process. If I define my process as I'm buying my parts from a supplier and I'm producing a car that I'm shipping to my customer, that's an end-to-end process. What are the pieces that go into that? I could map that. I can take any process and I can map it into the sub-processes that make that up. Now, in fact, the people that teach this, Karen Martin and Mike Osterling, teach this and have written a book about it. If you can't describe what you're doing as a value stream, then you really don't know what you're doing. And just to be clear, what you think you're doing in a business process is often not exactly what's happening. And so one of the concepts of value streams is to actually, if you have a process, walk it through. Even if you have like an automated electronic system, think about the old days when you had a piece of paper and you had to work that, you had to take that piece of paper through a process. You've got to actually go through the process, because what you find out is that there are all of these alternative processes, or there are pieces of the loop that you didn't know existed, that have just grown over time, that were put in place without approval in some cases. So value streams are all about how I take a process and I break it up into its sub pieces so that I can measure it, so that I can understand the quality of each section, and I can understand the lead time. How long does it take to go through these sub processes? It can be done for any process in your business. And so if you look at the software value stream, typically that comes down into the DevOps cycle, or at least part of the DevOps cycle, which is I plan a user story, I build the code that represents that user story, I test it, I deploy it, usually in multiple stages, up to the point where I deploy it into production. Now, until it gets to production, until it gets in the hands of a user, then that user story is not adding value, right? So you've got to be thinking in terms of from the genesis of the story until it's being used by real people. And whether that's your business people inside your company, or whether it's your customers or your partners. In fact, it's become so popular and so prevalent that Gartner believes by 2023, 70% of the organizations out there especially in the Fortune 1000, are going to use value streams to improve the flow of their DevOps pipeline. Because, as I said before, in order to go fast with confidence, you need the business process in place. You need to make sure that the process is supporting you for that. So, what value streams do, and here is an image of the Capado DevOps 360 value stream map. What this is really designed to do is to expose your excess complexity. If you map the process as it actually works, then a lot of times you'll see, well, why are we doing that? Why am I doing this extra level of approval? It's not really adding any value, right? So you want to figure out if there's excess complexity. You want to look at your processing time, your cycle time, or your lead time, as it's called here, which is how long does it really take to get from one end to the other, and look for excessive work in progress. And the reason for that is that if you find that there's too much work going through the machine, then you've got piles and piles of work that are just not being worked on, and that leads to idle time. That leads to waste. And then, what is your percent complete and accurate? So you see the percent C/A. That's really all about percent complete and accurate, and that means how. If I take a user story from one end to the other, how likely is it that it's going to go straight through process block by process block and get to the end? And so let's go into the anatomy of these things a little bit and see. So at the top of our screen, you have the metrics that apply across the entire process, right? So in this particular case, and we do our DevOps process based on user story. And so these metrics apply to the average user story. In fact, let's go in and look at the definitions here. The total lead time is the sum of all the weighted averages across the process blocks within the stages. And we'll show you the stages in just a second. But in fact, what I can say is, looking at this, that a user story takes 96 hours to go from the beginning of the development process all the way to production and put into the hands of a user, right? So that's 4 days, effectively. The total idle time is the time of idle time across all stages. But what does idle time mean? It means that this story is sitting there, it's ready to go, it's ready to be worked on, but it's waiting. It's waiting for somebody. And so if you look at that 96 hours, 52 hours of that time is actually just, it's waiting, it's wasted. So this is a great example of how I could, by reducing the number of items that I'm actually trying to put through this machine, that is the DevOps process, I can reduce more than I could reduce the time at least by half, simply by reducing the idle time and not having to deal with making, don't crack the whip and try to make the developer code any faster, because your big gold mine right now is your 52 hours. Rolled percent complete and accurate. What that really means is that's the weighted average across all process blocks. And so think about, if I have like a 90%, if I have a 90% success rate at a stage, that feels pretty good. But if I take that 90% and I have 5 stages, then it's 90 times 0.9 times 0.9 times 0.9. Now I'm down to less to in the 50s of actual rolled percent complete and accurate. So the more stages you have, the more the times the complete and accurate will actually impact each other, to the point where, as you see here, the rolled CA is 15%. Now, you would think that's an amazingly low number, but in fact, if you start looking at a lot of value streams across companies, in reality, that's a typical number when you first start out, and you're saying, why in the heck is it so low? And it's because there are issues in certain blocks, and the value of the value stream map is to be able to identify, okay, well, why is that 15%? Well, if one of my blocks is 20% and the others are in the high 90s, then you found your culprit and you know where to focus. And the total work in process is the number of work hours in the value stream, and it's summed up across all the stages. And it's easier to see here. So let's look at an individual process block and look at the information you're able to get out of it. I can get this area at the top, this light blue area, is really my waiting room. Think of it as the waiting room for the development process. And notice in this particular development process, I've broken out the development into front end and back end. Why? It's because the processes for front end development and back end development are different enough that I want to see the distinction, right? And in fact, if you talk to Java developers and back end developers, they'll say that JavaScript stuff is so easy. Why are you comparing us to them? They of course it only takes a few hours for them to do their work. It's just JavaScript. It's not like real programming like we do on the back end. So you have the ability to split a stage, which is the development stage here, into multiple process blocks because generally driven by the fact that these processes are slightly different and they work in parallel. So it's a choice when you're sending a user story through. It's either a front end story or it's a back end story. And then if you look at the waiting room there, you can see that the idle time, it's 18 hours of waiting to get a developer to look at it, and it's 30 items that are sitting in a pile waiting to go. And then in the actual process block itself, you can see how many items are there, how many operators are there, the lead time, percent complete and accurate, and it's pretty straightforward. Idle time is the average idle time that a work item spends waiting in this section of this stage. So as I said before, 18 hours for a story to get from ready to being looked at by a human being. Work items waiting, I've got 30 items waiting. It takes 23 hours of lead time for a front-end developer and an hour more for a back-end developer. Now, just to be clear, the 23 hours includes the 18. So what that's telling me is it's only actually taking 5 hours for a front-end developer to do the work. It just took 18 hours of waiting to get it through. And then the percent complete and accurate, it looks like my front-end developers are more accurate. Their stories actually, by the time they release the code to test, it works. It works the way that they predicted. But in this case, my back-end developers, it's 80%. And again, the back-end developers will tell you that because it's way too hard to do back-end code, and it should be less quality because it just is more. It's more difficult. It takes a better intellect to do that. I'm not making fun of back-end developers. It's just, we work with them. We know. And then notice that the number of work items that I'm dealing with, I got 10 items that are in process right now, and I've got 3 operators. And an operator in this case is developer because it's a developer stage. But when I get into the next block, which is testing is an operator is maybe a quality test engineer, right? So you have the opportunity to show what are the different operators within these different stages. Now notice that I have 10 items in the front end development and I have 3 operators. That means right now I got these 3 operators are each working on 3+ stories at one time. So they're not really working on a story, doing it complete, and then moving it on to the next step because they're in development on these 3 things, these 10 items across 3 people, and 4 stories on the back end. They got 20, and they've got that spread across 5 workers. So that's something I can get from just looking at this document right now. It's not something I can easily find by going in and looking at a report on Salesforce. I mean, I could if I knew how to write the report, but this is like calls it out to me in real time. And one of the other cool things that you'll be able to do with this in a release real soon now, in the next couple of weeks, is you'll be able to set thresholds on these numbers so that you could say above a certain percentage, yes, I've got my normal and my yellow alert and my red alert. So now I can look at a value stream map and I can see, okay, what's out of whack? Where do I need to manage by exception? And so under the covers, one of the things to understand is that that there is an event collector. And especially within Salesforce, you can think of, well, it's user story. I have a user story, and the user story has a status. And that status, if it's in planning or develop or integrate or test or release, then I can just report on that right now, right? Yes, but what happens under the covers in practice with any value stream map is that if everything was 100%, if everything started in plan and went all the way to release and it never got rejected, then it would be easy. But what happens is if I get to develop and I go into integrate and my merge didn't actually happen, if I had merge conflicts and it got bumped back to development, then I've had a failure, and I'm gone back to develop. And so I could literally start out in plan, send it to developers. The developers, even though we have a sprint planning meeting, the developers look at the actual user story really clearly for the first time and say, oh, I don't have enough information here, so I'm going to reject this back to plan, right? So I can go from plan to develop, back to plan, back to develop. They do the code. It doesn't integrate. They go back to development. Then I go all the way to test. It fails the test. I go back to development. Development says, oh, I need some more information. Goes back. So, oh my God, this user story is bouncing around. And the way that we are able to track all of that is we have an event history that's tracking each transition between these two things, between these stages. So we know exactly what the life cycle of this user story was, and we're able to accumulate the time accordingly. And then earlier I said, we got 30 user stories that are sitting in the development waiting room ready to get started. But what are they? Are they front end or are they back end? Well, a lot of times you want to know more information about the numbers that are sitting there. This map is great because it can give you an overview, but really, what are those stories? And so if I click through, what's going to happen is I'm going to now see what are the actual user stories that are making this up. And so even though I had a weighted average of time on that screen, I can see that here are the actual times, and it looks like most of my stories, the vast majority of my stories, are somewhere between 1.5 hours and 5.5 hours. But then I got two that are outliers, two that are 10 and 3/4 and 10 and 1/4. So now I'm able to actually go in and click through that and say, well, what the heck is going on there? So now I can open up that user story and try to dig in to find out what the detail is. What is it that's causing this thing? And are there anything in common between 055 and 0408 that I can see that's potentially causing it? So the visual, the value stream map is a great tool to give you the overview and to try to identify bottlenecks and identify waste, but then you really need to dig into the details to try to find out what's going on there underneath the covers. And the other thing to know is our user story stages and our process is different than almost anybody else. And in fact, most companies do tweak these things. And in fact, that's really something you have to account for in a value stream map. So because we're built on the Salesforce platform, and because we all come from a culture of let people make it their own, give them something that's useful right out of the box, but let them make it their own. We make it possible to completely customize not only the stages, you get to choose what your stages are and what your process blocks are, but then you get to, on a very detailed level, you get to decide what the stages mean. And so one thing to keep in mind here is we did this on the user story, but the value stream map can be used on an opportunity. I can put it on an opportunity and I can look at opportunity stage and I can figure out where my opportunities are taking time. Or I can put it on lead, or I can put it on a case, or I can put it on any other object in Salesforce as long as it has a pick list value that represents the stages that it's going through in this process, a state machine, if you will. If you build a state machine, and you could label the states, and you know what the transitions are, then you can actually define a value stream map that does this. It also shows you, for example, that there are times when there are two states that represent waiting. And this may actually, if you look at develop here, I've got waiting time is ready for development and an approved. Well, if you first start out and you put that into the value stream map, you're going to say, well, okay, both of those means it's waiting, but really, can I really start working on something that's ready for development but hasn't been approved yet? What's the difference between those two? And you start looking at your process and start trying to identify, well, is there another stage between plan and development? Is there an approval stage? And really, shouldn't ready for development mean that it's ready for approval, and then it's approved, and then it's ready for development? So you start getting into modeling your process, and you start out with something simple, and you start figuring out where you need more detail. And that's really a good principle with value stream maps is don't try to do too much right away, right? You don't want 100 different states and stages right away. You want to try to get your arms around the big picture and try to figure that out. But key issue here, make sure that you're able to model and you're able to know how you're using user stories or how you're using opportunities in your process and be able to map that into a set of stages and a set of process blocks that are there. Same thing with the high-level metrics. Our high-level metrics are simply the sum or average of the same metric in all of the process blocks, and so you can get that. You can even add custom values. If I wanted to know, one of the things I could do, for example, if I had a cost factor and I knew how much a user story was costing me to do as it progressed in time, I could actually track the cost of a user story. And if I've got a fixed bid, if I'm an SI partner, for example, and I've got a fixed price bid, I could say, okay, how much of my cost has already been incurred and delivered to the customer, and how much is still work in process that I just need to get over the finish line. Getting the ability to do these custom metrics at the top are important. And so that was the value stream maps, and just a little plug for the analytics portion of it. Sometimes you need to go in and understand why. So I may find that, for example, if I've got an integration phase and I'm failing, why am I failing the integration? Well, I can look at the number of metadata components that I'm actually trying to put into a release, and I find that I'm trying to actually put 150 metadata components on a single user story. Well, why would you do that? That's not going to be a success, a recipe for success. So this analytics tool adds to the value stream maps, and once you start identifying where the problems are, you can actually go in and do another forensics tool. It's like going to a doctor. The doctor gives you your blood pressure test, takes your temperature, weighs you, and listens to your heart and does an EKG. And these are different tools, and these different tools are appropriate for the different kind of problems that you're going through. And so this is all possible really because Capado is a full orchestration engine across all the different stages of DevOps. In your Salesforce practice, it makes it easier with Capado because you have everything together. But even if you were using, for example, Jira to measure your users, to plan your work, well, first of all, Capado can integrate with Jira and pull those in so that we can have access to that information. But even if you're using a combination of tools, a value stream map can be built as long as you have an object in Salesforce that represents that capability, and it has the stages built into it. So even if you're not using Capado, you're using some other process, and you want to actually put in a value stream map, you can do that and model your process, even if your process is running on SAP. But you can actually do external objects in Salesforce and bring those status values into Salesforce. You can build a value stream map on top of that. That's what I had planned. We're right at 40 minutes, and I have time
Okay.
for questions. I don't know if we're able to take questions.
Yep, we've got some, David. So let me just start shooting them at you here. First question, how long should you observe your current value stream before trying to improve the process?
Uh, we think if you're on a sprint cycle, if you're in an agile process, if you're in the agile process, for example, and you have 2 week sprints like we do, then you probably want a couple of sprints. I would say you would probably do 2, 3 sprints, and to try to make sure that your data is shaking out, and really take a look at that. You could. The reality is you can start looking at this data from day one, and in fact, one of the things that we do, another plug for our value stream map, is we mine your field history data. So if you were to turn on your field history tracking on the status value of your user story, or whatever kind of user story you're using, you could go back and mine the history of that, because that has the transition dates and timestamps associated with it. But in general, I would say once you put a value stream map together and you've got a sprint is your kind of your unit of work, your time unit of work. I would say 2 to 3 sprints, and then really take a look at it and see if you can see patterns that are going on. If your releases, if you're doing monthly releases or 6 month releases, you may have the luxury of keeping the value stream map on for that first release, to see what's going on. If you're using something for sales, for example, of course, you have a quarterly sales cycle, and there's always a hockey stick in sales. If you're whether you're monthly or quarterly, you're going to see a hockey stick. And so, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you've got a full cycle for the process you're measuring, at least before you start drawing conclusions, especially in a sales type process.
Sure. Next question is value stream mapping the same as business process mapping, but only for the dev team?
Um, Business process mapping is a generic, I think, a generic concept, and value stream maps is a practice that is a type of business process mapping, but it's got specific ideas and concepts around it, and specific rules around how it works. So yes, it's a form of it. It's different. It's a form of it with a whole set of rules about how you do things and what to measure. For example, lead time, percent complete and accurate, are very and idle time are concepts that are in value stream maps as a rule, and not necessarily as something that you would use in business process mapping per se.
Okay. And the last question is, at what level of automation do you find most of your customers at Copado? Do you think that using an ETL or ELT tool will help the process?
We see most of our customers are already what we call level 3. Well, they're at level 2 by the time we see them. A lot of customers in Salesforce, for example, have started using Salesforce DX, so that they're actually putting their Git repos are holding the source of truth for their work, and so that's level 2 on our chart. And so the reality is they've got their developers, their pro coders are using Git, and their low coders, their admins aren't. So even within the different levels, you see that different teams are at different levels of maturity. Now we believe as a best practice that all of your coders, admins are people too. Admins are developers too. And so if your admins and your low coders and your pro coders are on different DevOps processes, well, you've got a problem. And you're not, and especially if you put a value stream map on there and you're only measuring your pro coder developers, well, that's fine. That's got value, right? You can start using it to measure your pro coders, but you really should be bringing your admins and your low coders into the same process, meaning that you check into Git the changes. Now, that doesn't mean they're using Git as a UI. In Copado, we have an object that you can check into Git, the changes that are being made, and we believe that that's a best practice. We see a lot of when customers bring on Copado, they're typically at level 2 and a little bit of automation. They've already got some static code analysis. They've already got some Selenium tests that they're doing. So there's some aspects of their business that are at level 2, some aspects that are at level 4, but not completely. So what we see when they install Capado is we are a strong user story centric practice. And so we'll immediately, by installing Capado, you're immediately going to level 3, using Git as your source of truth, using user stories. And then you're somewhere between 3 and 4 because now you've got that automation. And then by putting in our continuous delivery tool, our Capado continuous delivery pipeline manager, you can begin to get more and more of your systems automated. But that's a great question. What automation do I do? What kinds of things do I automate? And that's exactly where value stream maps come in handy, because if you find out that you're spending all of your time, why is it taking so long to get a story out of development into the integration? And maybe it's because you've got a pull request process and you've got a human being manually reviewing the code of another programmer. And now it turns out when you start measuring it, oh my God, my code review cycle is taking 3 days. Does it really take 3 days? No, they spend, it's 2 hours to actually do a code review, but it's waiting for 3 days before a human being actually takes the time to do the code review. So this is a great example of where if I can look at that, if I can go back to my boss and say, I want to put in static code analysis, and I want to put the time and the effort into doing a PMD or a code scan or some other tool, check marks or some other tool to make sure that we're writing code according to the rules that we put together. And he says, how much is it going to cost? And I say, it's $20,000 worth of effort for us to do that. And he goes, I don't want to spend $20,000. And you can come back to him and you can say, but I can save the company $100,000 if you do that, because you've measured the amount of delay that it causes when you're doing these pull requests. And so, hey, I can recover your investment in 2 months, and then pay it back in spades for the rest of the year. That's the kind of power you need. You need to turn your DevOps program. You can't think of it as a pure cost center. You need to get, if you get this, knowledge is power. And if you get insight into how much time you're saving and how much velocity increase really impacts your company, then you can justify the tools so that you can go faster.
Great. Thank you so much, David. We're over time here, but it was a great presentation and great to talk with you. Thanks everybody for being part of this session. And I just want to say the next session is going to be on flows, and that'll start at the top of the hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you.